This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Many of you have already used this code, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. In the 1950s, George Reeves embodied the Man of Steel in Superman's first television adaptation. From its gritty black and white beginnings to the kid-friendly color years, to this day, an entire generation reveres George as their Superman, while for others, the show remains an overlooked chapter in the character's mythology. On this podcast, we bring everyone together as we break down each episode of Adventures of Superman. Welcome to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Season 2, Episode 4, Jet Ace, is longtime Superman and DC Comics editor Mike Carlin. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for forcing me to watch one of my old favorite TV shows again.
It's truly great to have you here. I know I've said this to you off mic, but I want to say it on the show, on the record here, how formative and foundational the triangle era of comics that you oversaw the late 80s into the 90s was for me. It really formed so much of the basis of my understanding of Superman and the supporting cast and the world of Metropolis. If not for the triangle era, I would not be doing this or my other Superman podcast, Digging for Kryptonite. Wow. I've come into contact with so many people because of my love of comics and Superman. So to you and to all those triangle era creators who brought those comics to life, I will forever be grateful. So really, thank you.
Oh, it was besides being a pleasure, it was just our jobs. We got paid to do it. So that made that part of it easier. At the same time, my first exposure to Superman was this TV show and the fact that my mother loved comic books. My mother loved Superman and Wonder Woman. She didn't care about Batman, but I had another TV show to get me into that. But she loved EC comics as well. So she's the one who read in the paper that there was going to be a comic convention and brought me to the comic convention in 1969. And I was like, oh my God. And then to actually be able to not just be an editor in comics, because I wanted to be an artist, but I'm not good enough. And but then what were the odds that you end up working on Superman, a character that you do care about and you have some thoughts about and knowledge of, and it just was amazing. And then they gave us pretty much complete control, obviously, when we wanted to do something drastic like killing him or getting him married or even getting him engaged, it was just like we had to get permission. But they were really trusting. They let us do a lot of things. And they realized that, obviously, after 50-something years, they needed to reboot the series kind of to get some of the barnacles off and then start it fresh and basically let people in on the ground floor in a lot of ways. So John Byrne did a lot of updating and revamping and some small stuff that I think was super important, like keeping Ma and Pa Kent alive, were just amazing, nothing ideas that were everything. And it was just like, it was fun to see that playing out. And the fact that I worked with John at Marvel on the Fantastic Four was partly how I got my foot in the door on Superman. But then, when John Byrne left Superman, Jerry Ordway, also a guy who loved Superman forever, Roger Stern, all these people, Louise Simonson, John Bogdanove, Dan Jurgens, everybody just loved Superman, but we all kind of loved the same Superman. So it made it easier to collaborate. It made it easier to connect the stories, sometimes, literally, and sometimes just with background noise. We had the same people working in the Daily Planet office, and I'm not just talking about Lois and Jimmy. I'm talking about the guy who never talked, Wit, or the copy girl, Alice, and it's like there was always somebody that could just be dragged through all the books. And it was just fun stuff to do. Most importantly, we all thought that Clark Kent, not Superman, Clark Kent, was the best ever from the Adventures of Superman TV show, because he's almost tougher than Superman. And while I don't think Jet Ace is the greatest Superman episode, it's a really good Clark Kent episode, because Clark Kent is like, he's the hero in the story. Well, him and the Jet Ace himself,
Yes.
Chris White.
No, absolutely. And again, I could talk about the Triangle era forever, but I do just want to say I read and loved it as a kid, but then over these past couple of years, I've gone back and I reread the entire thing and appreciated it on a different level, because I could see now more clearly as an adult the weaving of all of those supporting characters and subplots, and how Metropolis felt like such a lived-in world. It had a feel to it. And it was those subplots. Yes, the big tentpole stories were always a lot of fun and exciting, but it was a lot, in many instances, those subplots and following our supporting players, that you really felt invested in all of this, and you felt like you were part of this ongoing narrative, as you had 4 and then eventually 5 titles all working together, telling a coordinated story for essentially a weekly Superman adventure.
Well, that was the thing. We had the room to get to all that stuff. We had the space. And it's like, if you're doing like one big storyline after another, and you don't have that, 1 episode or 2 episode one shot, the Christmas mailbag, the Alice the Copy Girl living at the Daily Planet episodes, we had the room to do that kind of stuff, and it really made a difference. If even just one title a year, you only get 12 stories, or 12 chapters of a story. And it's one of the things you can really notice in the age of streaming shows is some stories don't need to be 13 hours long. Some stories, so you can do a series that's 10 episodes, but if you only have a 5-episode story, you got to do 2 stories, and it's like, you got to kind of let the stories be the length they are. And one of the things we did right more often than not, in retrospect, is that we would end stories leaving people wanting more, and even as the year-long story of the death and return of Superman, I think people could have gone another 6 months with that stuff, but I'm glad we didn't try that. It was just like, it was the perfect length. And part of that was that we were trying to have Superman back and on the stands the same week that the Lois and Clark TV show debuted on ABC, I guess. And it just was all well done, I thought, not because of me, but in spite of me. The guys, everybody had their heart in the right place. We all checked our egos at the door, and only Superman mattered. And I think that came through. I think one of the problems in comic books since that era is that they are only stories about superheroes. They're not stories about people. There's no supporting casts. There's no settings. It's corny, but saying Metropolis as a character is a real thing. And it does, again, a lot of that came from stuff like The Adventures of Superman. Obviously, the Christopher Reeve movie as well is a pretty good formative thing. But one of the things about our era was that we were able to cherry pick what worked and what didn't work. Because, as I was saying, the Clark Kent from Adventures of Superman is a tough-ass character, man. That you can't. He didn't get pushed around, and this episode in particular shows him being a real hard ass, and it's great, because I don't think that mild-mannered means milquetoast or stumblebum or anything like that. And that, no offense, Chris Reeves era, it's just like that portrayal of Clark Kent to me would draw more attention to him as Clark Kent than less. And I always had a problem with that. And so luckily I surrounded myself with a bunch of people who agreed with that.
Yeah, I mean, again, the Triangle era is foundational. It's truly a cornerstone of my fandom, and I've always gravitated to the more confident, capable Clark, in large part because of growing up on those comics. It's been interesting now going back and exploring Adventures of Superman and now seeing kind of that connection point, and now hearing specifically from you that George Reeves depiction was an influence. Was that something that you actually had specific conversations with the creators about?
Yeah, we would talk about it when we had our super summits every year. We would all get together. And even in private, we would just talk about, what we liked and what we didn't like. Obviously, there was a couple of guys who just loved the Kirby stuff that dealt with, the the Forever People and Jimmy Olsen stuff. And so Carl Kiesel and Jerry Ordway did a lot of stuff with the Kirby stuff. And I like the Kirby stuff, but it was not something that I would be that into. But I was definitely more into the TV show. Like I said before we started, I would steal titles from this series. Panic in the Sky directly came from this. Identity Crisis came from it's not an episode title, but it was a umbrella title over one of the VHS tapes of the Adventures of Superman that they put out. So I stole that too. And it's like, it's just, it was just stuff that was always in the back of my mind, and it's like, and when I don't want to answer a question, saying no comment until the time limit is up is the greatest way out of everything.
Right? It's pretty perfect.
It's a perfect answer. And if people know what it is, it's even better.
No, look, there, as we all know, right, there are different ways to interpret and present the character. But I do think when you're trying to tell stories over an extended period of time, like in the Triangle era, when you have, like you said, you have that space, you have that room, you have multiple titles, when you have an ongoing television series like Adventures of Superman, like Lois and Clark, and so on, I think having, again, a Clark who is more capable, I think maybe gives you a little bit more of an engine to run on and gives more for the audience to sink their teeth into, as opposed to I think that bumbling shtick would get old if it were extended episode to episode.
Yeah, you check out the Superboy TV show for how that doesn't work so well.
And I know you worked on that, and I'm actually, that had been one of the gaps in my fandom. And literally as we speak, I'm about halfway through the series. So I'm almost done.
It's hardly shown anywhere. And first season, one of the reasons that the first Superboy is gone is that he didn't want to do the Chris Reeve version, but Elia Salkind obviously loved his version of Superman and wanted to do that. So that once you get into the second season, they start making him a little more, kind of a big dummy. But then the third and fourth season, I actually think they came up with an original premise and a setting, and it was very different than him just going to school, and it really comes together nicely. And that was put together with the new story editor, Stan Berkowitz, who then we recommended to the guys who were doing the Batman animated TV series. So he worked on that and the Superman animated TV series. And so Stan Berkowitz has been around our stuff for a long time as well. And he's not somebody that people mention a lot, but he was definitely a big part of how things happen. And I actually think that the Superboy show got better and better as it went along. But it was a syndicated show at a time when there was a lot of syndicated shows, and it just never was in the same spot twice. TV channels would move it around all over the place. It's like when you look at this Jet Ace episode, and part of the reason why they made Clark such a tough character on the show, it was cheaper to have a guy in a suit be filmed than to have anybody in that superhero suit. Even the scene where he, saves the jet in this one, it's like that was hard for them.
So Jet Ace, let's get into the episode here. We'll break it down. So this aired October 10th, 1953, written by David Chandler, directed by Tommy Carr. I'll give my synopsis and then we'll share our overall impressions and we'll go through the episode. Perry's nephew, Captain Chris White, is a test pilot who passes out and nearly crashes while hot dogging in the jet during a demonstration for the military. Under orders from the general and Perry, Chris agrees to stay at his uncle's mountain lodge for some much-needed R&R and to write his flight report. At the cabin, Chris is taken by Nate and Frenchie under orders from a masked mastermind, ultimately revealed to be rival reporter Steve Martin, who planned to sell the jet's secrets. After Superman rescues Chris from a fiery death trap, they lay a trap of their own to prove Martin's guilt, and Chris dukes it out with his former captor while Clark and the others watch on. So, overall impressions, what do you think about this? Did you remember watching this in the past?
It's not one that really stood out to me from my youth or from my years of watching the show. I have the ones where the Superman action is bigger, crashing through, rock walls and buildings, and obviously, standing up to a buzzsaw and having the teeth of the buzzsaw fly off his body. That stuff is a big deal that sticks in your mind. But I have, when the DVDs came out, not only did I get to be on some of the extras, which was thrilling, because I got to see my real theory is that people think that I was inspired by Superman or Clark Kent, but the real truth is I was inspired by Perry White to be an editor, and they did a nice side-by-side shot of me and Perry White from the show. But anyway, I watched the whole series when that came out. I just bought the stuff digitally on Vudu, which is now Fandango at home. But which is why it was like not a problem for me to watch this episode again yesterday. So I have it all digitally. It's handy. I don't have to go digging for it or hunt it down or whatever. And I am in the middle of my own rewatch of that. I'm also rewatching Seinfeld at the same time.
So how far are you into your Adventures of Superman rewatch?
I'm right around this point. I did the first season and I had just started the second season. So I think I might have skipped a couple to get to this one, but that's okay. But it's just like, I think this episode was, I think it didn't stick with me because it's not heavy with superhero action. It doesn't have a lot of Superman on camera. It's got one important scene with the airplane and, well, two, and the cabin on fire. I would have loved if he had blown the fire out, but he didn't. He just let it burn. But that would have cost money. And honestly, for my money, his super breath power is the stupid looking power. It just looks silly when you draw it. It looks silly when they do it. Frosty breath is just a weird power to have. So that, and then especially as you say at the end of the show, the Chris White character is doing all the fighting, and it was like story-wise that was important for the character to do. And Lois even says, Clark, go help this guy. And Clark's like, nope, I'm going to let him have his fun. And he does. And as a kid, that would not be as interesting to me, which, even when you look back at the show, the fact that they never did Lex Luthor is surprising to me. I understand why they wouldn't do Brainiac and things like that, but it is a show about thugs and, underworld and that kind of stuff. There's not even magic really in the show. It's, they have some scientists that do some scientist things. They did some time travel. They did a couple of things like that, but they don't really do the big concepts on this series. It's very down to earth. And it's guns. Yeah. It's just people with guns. And one of the funny things in the last scene in this episode is Clark actually grabs a bullet that would have hit Chris White. So that's the extent of his involvement at the end. He saves the guy so that he can go punch up the real bad guy. I get the character's name was Steve Martin. I wish it was the real Steve Martin. But he shoots the gun at Chris White. So Chris White was really Superman in the last scene. He was definitely not, he was definitely a character that could hold his own. In fact, I thought the actor his name is Lane Bradford, could have been Superman. He had a bigger chin than anybody I've ever seen. I mean, he had a real profile, as we used to say in Hollywood. And he could have been a Superman himself, I thought. And
very much so. I think my biggest takeaway was just how impressed I was with the character of Captain Chris White. And I think they really did a great job of establishing him and showing how tough and resourceful he is as he's fighting off the goons that come after him at various points, and Martin himself and his principles, right? He won't sell out these secrets. He holds his own. You see his cleverness when he is able to kind of tip off that helicopter pilot and ultimately directs him towards Perry White. So I think you really, and then the way he throws down in that final scene, I mean, they're really going at it. So I thought this was a great character introduction. I'm so disappointed that though the actor comes back as different characters, Chris White doesn't. It felt like it would have been cool to see that character come back again.
I was happy to see that they gave Perry White some relatives. I thought that was a good idea. And we did that in our comics as well. And I only wish that I had remembered this episode more, because his nephew would have been a good character to use. And I just didn't remember the connection. It would have been cool because the guy was good. He's almost like he could have been a romantic rival for Clark with Lois. He could have been something, like with Jimmy. He could have been a sidekick to Superman in some ways, maybe more down to earth character like our gangbuster type of guy or whatever. But I did like that he was connected to Perry, and it gave Perry some good worry lines to have in this episode.
Well, that's the thing and I've talked about this on the show before, but with Perry White, I really do gravitate. I love John Hamilton. I love this incarnation of the character, but I do gravitate most towards the version from the comics I grew up reading and from Lane Smith on Lois and Clark, where yes, there is that gruffness there, and he's the tough editor, but you do get to see the other side of him and the more paternal side. Right. And I like that. And in an episode like this, when you see the concern that he has, I like that you get those different colors.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's like just yelling all the time is not a good thing. And I learned that when I was a boss at DC too. It's tough. And they did have the fact that he never fired Jimmy was the extent of him being a nice guy, I think. Not that Jimmy ever did anything that bad.
Right. Well, it's funny with Chris White, I was thinking about this. So in the Superman Returns movie, we have the character of Richard White, who's a pilot. I mean, that's probably a pretty tenuous connection. I don't know if this was in any way, shape, or form an inspiration, but it was just like a relative of Perry who's a pilot. I'm like, oh, interesting. Whether intended or not.
I guess we did Jerry White, his son, in our comics. And unfortunately, he died. He was kind of a bad kid. He didn't live long enough to become a pilot of any kind or anything. But he was, the Blaze Satanist Wars, I think we did a really good story about that kind of stuff, which, led to other stories for Perry White and his wife down the road, because it gave them a real tragedy to deal with, which was kind of, it was fun. Fun in the creative way, not fun in the real world way.
Yeah. No, but I understand. No, I know. And I know exactly the stories that you're talking about, and they were very resonant, and I got a lot out of them. So another one that really stands out for sure.
Well, it was good. And it was good that he was kind of like a bad kid. He definitely was doing things wrong and causing his family a lot of grief. And I think that kind of thing, like, I don't think that Perry White's family necessarily has to all be good guys. I don't think that Lois's family has to all be good guys. I guess her father is kind of a tough nut.
Yeah, we've seen different spins on General Sam Lane over the years, where sometimes the level of antagonism can vary, and sometimes we truly veer into villain territory, but often not quite.
I don't know if you've seen any of the latest animated show, My Adventures with Superman.
Yes,
that was one of the last things that I was working on. And I didn't have to do a lot on it because they were doing a great job. And somewhere in the ether are my emails back to them when I would read a script, and I would just praise, like I said, after 80 years, you finally are doing something fresh with this old junk, and you really are doing a fun new angle on it. And Sam Lane is a big part of that show. And I like their version of him there. I think he is kind of a good guy in the end. And I just like I was really surprised that they found some new stuff to do that I didn't think of. It's always fun when I'm working on these movies or TV shows or whatever to have them do something where I say, holy shit, I wish I thought of that. I wish we had come up with that. Why didn't we think of that? One of the things that they did in the Superman animated series, the Bruce Timm and Alan Burnett show, right in the first episode was they made Jor-El the creator of the Brainiac. And I was like, why didn't we think of that? Our Brainiac has got a pretty convoluted, goofy start, but it's just like this is a classic villain now for Superman, who's almost like his brother because Jor-El invented him. And it really, to me, was like, this could be this is the way a villain should be. Villain shouldn't just be a guy who wants to steal from the bank. He should be a guy who has a personal connection to the hero. And I thought that I don't even think they explored it enough on the show to emphasize the fact that Jor-El created him the same as he created Kal-El. And it's like that Brainiac had so much more potential than anything else. And I wish we thought of it. So it's always fun when that happens.
Yeah, it really was a great choice to integrate Brainiac into the Kryptonian mythology and origin story in that way. I do think that was a great take. And yes, to my adventures with Superman, I found it such a delight. Enjoyed it a lot. Really looking forward to more. Now you mentioned
season 2 is great. I'm telling you, I worked. It was all written by the time I left, and it's great.
Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. Now, you mentioned, going back to Jet Ace, Lane Bradford as Captain Chris White. Like I said, he comes back in seasons 3 and 4 as different characters, unfortunately. And also, I was delighted to learn he's originally from Yonkers, New York. I grew up in Westchester, lived in Westchester my whole life. So yeah, until just a couple of years ago. So yeah, he's from Yonkers.
That's where all the big chins live.
And then we have Selmer Jackson as General Summers. He was Colonel Redding in the Double Trouble episode from season 1, the colonel who Clark goes to see in Germany, one of his best friends.
Right.
And he's back in season 4 as a different character. Larry Blake as Steve Martin. He was one of the henchmen in the Secret of Superman episode from season 1. So we have a lot of people who've been kind of recycled through here.
Here's my question for you. I have a question. The guy who plays Frenchie is Dick Reeves. Richard Reeves. Any relation?
I can actually answer this. No relation.
Oh,
No relation. But yeah,
I wanted him to be a relation.
I know that would have been a fun bit of business, but no, no relation to George Reeves. He is in a total of 5 episodes of Adventures of Superman, again as different characters, and he is in the 1961 Superboy pilot as well.
Oh, really? That's cool.
Which I'll be talking about down the line a little bit, so audience stay tuned. And then Jim Hayward as Tim Mallory. He's the helicopter pilot who also comes back as different characters in seasons 3 and 4. So that's our guest cast.
All of these guys are the kinds of guys that are the reason we came up with Bibbo in our comics, is because, they could have done Bibbo on this show and he would have fit right in and he would have been a perfect fit. In fact, I named Bibbo after a thug character from The Honeymooners. He was a guy who tries to beat up Ralph, and Ralph ends up kicking his ass. And Marv and Jerry Ordway came up with this informant that became Superman's favorite fan because he could take a punch, so Bibbo thought that Superman was pretty cool. And I said, this guy's going to be around for a while. We like him too much. So I just named him after that stupid character from The Honeymooners.
So what a great connection to make. So the audience has heard this. I've talked a lot about, I love The Honeymooners. I grew up watching the reruns every New Year's Eve, and I own them on multiple formats, and I've watched all the Lost episodes. I love it immensely. And of course, I love the Triangle Era, including Bibbo. I had never made that connection though. And I'm so glad you said that.
They're the only 2 people named Bibbo I've ever heard of.
I know. It just never, that's amazing. Well, and I know, this is a little afield, but in the Triangle Era, I know there were other nods to the Honeymooners in the books. There was the intergalactic, driver essentially.
Cramden.
Yeah. So, that's great. I love, huge Honeymooners fan.
It was this era of actor, this era of, those thugs from the Honeymooners episode would have fit right in on this show. And also, obviously, Superman fit in on the I Love Lucy show, so it's like these characters could have crossed over and worked with each other if they wanted to.
Yeah, no, that's very true. So at this point, we typically do kind of our scene by scene discussion here. So I'll kind of set them up, and then anything that stands out to you from these scenes, we can talk about. So we open, we have this kind of extended sequence where we have stock footage of the airfield and the planes flying, and we have our Daily Planet quartet along with General Summers in Summers' office, and they're listening on the radio as Captain Chris White, nephew of Perry, is performing his maneuvers. And one thing that I noticed right off the bat, it appears to be a very large, prominent map of the state of California on the wall there.
I didn't notice that, but it makes sense. They were shooting it in LA. The series was done here. Obviously, the Daily Planet building is the City Hall in Los Angeles here, which I get a kick out of every time I drive past it. And it's just really cool that they use that as the Daily Planet building. And it's still there, and they're still using it.
Yeah. I noticed too, just in terms of the kind of the positioning of the characters, you have Jimmy and Lois sitting together, and with Jimmy with his arm around Lois. And I know Jack Larson's and Noel Neal, they've talked about the great rapport, the friendship that they had. And you see the kind of just this unspoken thing, but just the body language of the two of them in that scene, like just very, very cozy.
And Clark was pretty cool too, because he was standing and listening very intently, and thinking that there was going to be no problem, which is what you should do. But then the minute there was a problem, he bailed out of the room right away, which was kind of classic. I thought the whole opening scene, while it worked for the time and it worked for the budget, because it's a pretty visually static scene, because people just stand there looking at a camera, there's like a down shot because it's the speaker on the wall. It's looking at them basically. And it's a scene where they're just listening to the radio, and it's not a visual scene at all. And I thought that was like kind of a gamble to start a action show with that kind of thing. They would cut away to these airplane shots but as you say, they were stock footage, and some shots that were close-ups of the pilot, but they were such close-ups you couldn't even see what he was doing much, and it was you just had to rely on him saying, oh, I can't breathe, oh no, oh, and that was then you start hearing the tailspin noise.
Yeah.
But it was like, I thought it was effective. It got you into the story, and maybe you worried a little harder because it was Perry's nephew.
That's true. I think, right off the bat, you have the personal investment, right? That kind of invites you to invest along with them. But to your point, and I was thinking about this too, just in terms of the real estate of the episode, that opening sequence goes on. I mean, that's a good chunk of the episode there. So yeah, a little bit of a gamble.
But luckily you get your Superman action right after that.
Yeah, absolutely. And because, early on, the general makes a comment about Chris needs a break. He's really been pushing it. He's been putting in, a lot of time up in the air. Working too hard. And then, Chris is advised to just maintain an even level, but he decides to take it into a dive. And that's when he starts having all of these issues. And obviously Clark, like you said, getting more concerned. And Lois has a remark about, you look like you can see him, right? Because he's just staring up. Clearly using his X-ray vision.
Not like you can see through the ceiling. Why are you looking at the ceiling?
But then, and you were alluding to this before, but when when it becomes clear that Chris is really in danger and Clark has to spring into action, as much as this Clark is always very cool and very tough, this was one instance where he really goes big in trying to sell this scared bit. He's like, I can't stand it. I've got to get out of here. And runs away.
Well, that was his cover story. He was amplifying it for the performance of Clark being a chicken.
Yeah.
I guess that was the closest he came to being the Chris Reeve Clark.
Which, the audience knows is I talk about this from time to time because the characters in various episodes will make cracks at Clark's expense about how he's a coward, essentially.
Yeah.
Yet, as I point out, he's always the first one that these characters will call for help. It's like, go get Clark. So it's like, but so a scene like this goes a long way because it's a very blatant example of Clark seemingly being afraid. So it lends credence when you get those cracks in this or other episodes about how they see him.
I guess it works better for me if it is just him manufacturing it rather than just always being, a guy who doesn't know how to use an orange juicer, that kind of thing. And it's like, it works. And then he runs out in the hall and the minute he takes off his glasses, what's coming. And you get a nice springboard leap of Superman in costume. And then the stock footage of Superman flying.
Yes. But it's, limited though it is, just kind of seeing him on a plane and then visualizing that kind of rescue. And so early in the episode, it was cool. It was really, really exciting.
Well, they did put a lot of, because the opening scene was so static and long, they gave you the action right away. And then they give you a little more action later on in the cabin, but it's not a Superman heavy episode at all. And even the great thing he did about straightening the jet out, it's not a very active visual thing. He's just sitting on it and theoretically pulling it up.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's a very, I guess I'll have to say it's just a very cheap way to do this stuff. And I think that personally, I always thought that was better than doing things like they did on Lois and Clark, which was they would write these really elaborate, big and visual things that they just couldn't pull off. So they were really good about creating stuff that they could handle and getting the idea across, so that this was a good example of that.
No, that's a great, I've always felt that it's like you keep it small, keep it simple, keep it within the realm of what you can do. And, you can go along with it. And it's easier to suspend your disbelief when you see the seams more, so to speak. It gets harder, but no, I agree. I think this is another good example of what they were able to do on this show. And then we have the aftermath where they're all back in the office, and we get the introduction of this Steve Martin. I know it's funny now, the name Steve Martin, as this rival reporter from The Blade. And somehow he was able to sneak his way in, and he's put off by the fact that he and other press presumably have been kept out while the Daily Planet crew has been let in. And the general has this whole point about they're here, not in an official journalistic capacity, but here, because of the Perry's connection to Chris on a personal level.
Yeah, I mean, it's so logical that to have the Planet be there because of the connection to the editor in chief. It's like the bad guy section of this is a little flimsy to me. I kept thinking, why do they need the report? Why do they need this stuff? Are they going to sell it to the Russians? Why?
That seemed to be the implication.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's not said explicitly, but he's planning later on. He talks about getting out of the country, and Chris calls him a traitor. I mean, and given the time period, right? Like you assume he would be selling the secrets to the right. But to your point, when what they're trying to steal or the information they're trying to get from Chris, it's about like the information about altitude and speed and fuel. I don't know.
I didn't know what they were getting so hot and bothered. I didn't know why there needed to be guns involved.
Yeah, it escalates I know. It escalates very quickly. But this is where, and the general and Perry, they insist on Chris taking a rest, and Perry offers up his mountain lodge where Chris can stay. And he can work on his report there. They can pull the data that they need from the instruments on the plane for that piece of it. And then Chris can write up his impressions and anything else in his flight report while he's resting at the mountain lodge.
With his rifle.
That's all he needs.
All I need is my rifle.
120 gauge shotgun. That's all he's good to go.
To write my report.
And the helicopter, postal service, right? The fact that they'll be able to deliver the report through this helicopter service. The helicopter and the shotgun. This guy's good to go. That's all he needs.
Again, it seemed like they were going out of their way to make it more complicated than it needed to be. They could have just given him an office of his own to sit and write the report in.
It's true. Yeah. I suppose they definitely could have done that. And then we see this lodge. We see Chris in the lodge. And very quickly he hears someone outside. And so we see him roll up a piece of paper, and he's clearly looking for a place to put it. We don't see where he puts it, though, because then we cut to outside with Frenchie and Nate. Of course, later we'll find out where he stashed it. But so these two guys, they're at the door, very threatening. Chris is holding up the gun at first, but they grab it, throw it outside. This is where I think a great instance of just, again, how tough Chris is, because even without the gun, one of the guys is like, you're going to lose. And he's like, I wouldn't be so sure about it. And, he gets into it, and he gets in that he really clocks Frenchie.
Yeah. Yeah. He was a brawler. And that clearly comes back at the end.
Yeah.
He's that was like a Batman TV show fight at the end.
Yeah, which I know we'll get to it, but the thing about it was, to your earlier point, clearly from Clark's perspective, right, it was important for Chris to have this victory over the guy who had put him through all of this. So you totally get it. At the same time, I mean, the guy's like fighting for his life. I mean, they're really. I mean, I know Clark would have stepped in if things really came to it and he had to.
Well, they went through every breakaway chair in Hollywood in that scene. It's like these chairs breaking on Superman are why I tuned in as a kid. I wanted to see the chairs breaking on Superman. But this was just a guy, and it was like a classic Western barroom brawl. And they wrecked desks and chairs, and everything was thrown at everybody. And again, there was guns involved. So it was a kind of a big deal. Honestly, Lois and Jimmy and Clark should have been helping the guy.
That's true.
They should have all been in there.
An all hands on deck situation. In case I forget later, let me mention now, those two actors who played Chris and Steve Martin, they were both in The Lone Ranger. So I think that the fight maybe been a little bit of an homage to that. But I also have to, so eventually Nate and Frenchie, they do get the drop on him at the lodge. But I love when Frenchie's like, oh, it was a lucky punch. And Nate goes, lucky punch, lucky he didn't knock your brains out.
Yeah.
But so they carry him off and they take him out of there. They purposely leave the gun, which, proves to be foolish because we'll learn later that was where he had stashed the report. And then they do talk about whether they should look for the report, but Nate, is very, very savvy. And he's like, well, we weren't paid for that. So we're just taking him and going.
Right.
And then in Perry's office, we have Perry worried, right? Because the helicopter pilot found the cabin empty when he was doing his making his rounds, right? Found the cabin empty and the gun just lying there. So Perry's concerned. Clark offers to go up. Then we have poor Jimmy, who just, happened to be walking by and gets wind of this and sort of inserts himself, and Perry bites his head off.
Yep. Well, you can't yell at Clark Kent because Clark Kent will yell back at you in this show.
I know. I do love any time. Well, I guess you kind of even see it at the very end when, after Chris is rescued and Clark is talking to Perry on the phone and he's just like giving him orders. I love that.
Yeah, it's the best.
And Perry says he makes Clark take Jimmy with him, and he's just like, he could lose him along the way. So we get that bit of business.
He loves him like a son.
Yeah, and to your point, he doesn't fight. He keeps him around, so he might might give him a hard time. But and in Perry's defense, clearly he's worried, right? Emotions are particularly high in this instance.
Yep.
One person who's not here in this scene and who has so little to do in this episode is Lois. That was one of my other big takeaways, right?
Yeah, she's not in this at all. It definitely was a guys' club show this week.
I know. And to your point, I had the same thought because I didn't remember when I started my rewatch. I didn't remember all of the beats of this episode, and to your point, the notion of maybe doing something with Chris and Lois. Obviously, the show would only go so far, but we have had other instances where there's been some sort of interest, and Clark feels like some sort of way, like the No Holds Barred episode. Like you wouldn't have been surprised if you saw something like that, but obviously this wasn't built for that.
No, this was built for cabin fires and rifles for no reason.
Well, speaking of the cabin, so Clark and Jimmy get there. Clark sends, Jimmy around to the side of the house so he can use his strength to bust the door open. But while Jimmy and Clark are investigating, the two guys come back now to look for the report. And so Clark and Jimmy hide outside and the guys tear up the place. And then after they drive off, Clark has Jimmy stay behind so Clark can go after them. But first, of course, he has to change into Superman. And so another Superman appearance with him on the roof of the car. What'd you think of that bit?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. That was kind of funny. I liked him holding the doors shut so that they couldn't get out. I thought that was kind of fun. And they only know that it's Superman they're dealing with when his cape droops over the edge of the car. It was like, oh, otherwise it was God talking to them as far as they knew.
I know. It's like how many contenders? Who else could it have possibly been? But. No, I like that. Yeah, no, that's the thing. I think I got a little more mileage maybe out of just the action because you have him on the. Oh, I forgot about that. It's funny too the pattern here. You have Superman on the roof of the plane, on the roof of the car, and then the fire bit. So you get a few bits of those action pieces with him, which was cool. I also liked how Nate and Frenchie. You see the tension between them. Right, where like Frenchie is much more cooperative and goes along.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to this guy. I'm going to give all the information that they need. And the other guy is like, don't stop. Shut up.
Yeah. So I thought that was cool. And we got a little exposition here. The notion that these guys have been getting their orders from someone over the phone and they're next due to receive a call from him, later that day in the hotel. And then before we go back to the Daily Planet, we see Chris bound in, a storage basement area of some sort. So he's bound, and we have his masked captor there who is interrogating him and asking him about the report and this information about the plane and, offering to cut Chris in on this. And so again, you see that strength even in this, tough situation.
Yep. That bad guy with the mask, that was some mask too, boy. They spent a lot of money for that one. And
it doesn't last long because he goes to call the hotel as planned. But he is savvy enough He's very quickly suspicious, recognizes that it's not Nate on the other end of the phone.
Right.
And so he starts to untie Chris, and then Chris makes a break for it, makes a move, and they tussle a bit, and that's when the mask comes off and stands revealed as Steve Martin.
Yep. And Steve Martin, who has he's jealous as a reporter, but he's also a traitor.
That's what I was going to say. Like, what's our read on this guy? Like, what, I wonder, I don't know. Just maybe the reporting career is not going well for him. That moment in the general's office was the last straw. He's like, I've had it. Like, I don't know.
Well, I mean, if you can make money selling secrets to anybody, being an investigative reporter is a good cover. That would actually work, and at the same time, they don't spell it out like that. That's me making up a story for them.
Yeah. Well, I'll go with it though. I think that definitely tracks.
Yeah.
So hope is kind of lost here at the Daily Planet, where, Perry's like, that there goes our last hope, because now Clark gets word from Henderson off screen, right? That, their plan to get the information using their replacement for Nate didn't work. And then back at the lodge, Steve Martin brings Chris back there and is prepared to, do away with him. But first we get a knock at the door, and it's Tim, the helicopter pilot. And this is where, again, you see Chris's savviness, because he is instructed to just get rid of Tim, right? But he does it in such a way where he, kind of plants the seed in his mind, right? Where he's like, oh, that letter that I sent for Perry White, like, did it get to him? It's really, really important. And thankfully, this helicopter pilot is diligent enough that in a couple of scenes, he'll go to the Daily Planet and investigate this. But I liked how he was able to do what he could in that difficult circumstance.
There was a lot of choreography in this episode. People going to and from places. Yeah. Which is, I mean, maybe that's good that the cabin ends up burning down, so we don't have to go back there.
I know that could have been, that could have been another spot. Well, it's funny.
Although it's kind of a dumb plan to set it on fire when you think that the handwritten notes might be somewhere in that room. Kill Chris White and just ransack the place. Don't just burn it all alive because the guy's not telling you that there's something there.
Yeah, I know. I know, that's true. Again, with Steve Martin here, it feels like a lot. This is another instance where I feel like things escalate very quickly with this guy.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, they only have 28 minutes, I guess.
True. This episode made possible in part by educator, hobby comic book collector, and pop culture enthusiast Sam Lim. Sam is based in the South Jersey area and is looking to connect with other comics fans as well as retailers. They're also looking for comic shops to explore, so recommendations are welcome. Be sure to follow Sam on Instagram at SZL Comics to see their latest comic pickups and shop adventures. I'm a proud backer of the Paragons of Earth comic book project, now available to support on Kickstarter. The creative team of Percival Constantine, Thomas DJ, and Eric Johns have plucked forgotten Golden Age superheroes from the public domain, reinvented them as their own sort of Justice League, and put them up against a Lovecraftian apocalypse. Back this project and learn more by going to percivalconstantine.com/paragons. Also, Perry, a multiple-time guest on Digging for Kryptonite, hosts the Superhero Cinephiles podcast about comic book-inspired films. Be sure to listen wherever you get podcasts. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of two of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. But yeah, ties Chris up and is preparing to light it on fire. And then back at the Daily Planet, there's this talk about, maybe Superman could help. And Clark has a line, like, even if Superman can find a needle in a haystack, he needs to know which haystack, right? He doesn't know where to look. And it feels like maybe going back to the cabin would be the worst place to start, but it's all right.
But Perry White should have just said, go to the cabin. Here's the key.
Exactly. But that's when Tim, the helicopter pilot, shows up and starts talking about this letter that he, thinks he might have dropped the ball with, and through the and of course Perry initially is very wants to get this guy out of the office, right? Doesn't really have time, but then it becomes clear that he's talked to Chris at the cabin very recently, so that sets them all in motion.
Yep, and then Superman goes there and obviously saves Chris from the burning cabin, but does not put out the fire in the cabin, which I don't understand why he would do that. Let it burn. And especially since it was his boss's cabin, it's like, this is not just a random cabin he's going to let go. It's something that Perry owns.
I know, because and now I'm trying to remember the exact end of the scene, because he just flies away, right? He leaves Chris outside.
He just goes back. He grabs the gun because Chris says, you got to get the gun. That's where the notes are. And he goes and gets the gun, and that's it. He just leaves, and he doesn't even put a blanket on the fire or anything.
I know, it's very curious. It'd be one thing if he was just like, wow, climb to that, or, walk to that clearing over there. I'm going to take care of the fire. And then we cut away and we don't see it, but at least.
Yeah, you don't have to see him doing anything about it, but just showing a smoking cabin room after Superman did something. It's like in a Kirby comic with Superman in it, he would have clapped his hands and the fire would have gone out.
Yeah, the clap would have been cool. That would have been cool. Well, and he says, I thought this was interesting, because he says that Clark he tells Chris Clark will come get him or meet him. And Chris makes a point of saying, I think Clark's a swell guy, no matter what Lois might think of him. And there's no basis for this. I'm told this is just my own headcanon. But does Chris realize that Clark is Superman? And that's why he's saying that. It just, it felt, I don't know. I was kind of struck by why would he say that to Superman?
It's pretty funny. Well, I guess everybody knows that Superman is friends with everybody at the Daily Planet, because, that's what the other paper should have been jealous of, is their access to Superman, not these jet reports.
That's true. Yeah, that could have been a cool angle for this. And then we're back at the Daily Planet with Clark and Chris there, and Perry calls, and Clark fills him in that Chris is alive. But they hatch this plan, and this is where Clark, again, barking orders. He's telling Perry to have the sheriff declare Chris dead, right? Because as he explains to Chris, even though they know Steve Martin had kidnapped him and was behind this, they don't have any proof, so they need to get something on him.
They have to entrap him.
Yeah. And then we have our final sequence here where we're back in the general's office, and they're all listening to this flight again. And Martin is there and hears Chris's voice. So he hears the voice of who he thinks is a dead man, who then walks in, who wasn't actually in the jet, but was just standing there with the radio in the hall.
Yeah. That was the trap. The sting was that they let Steve Martin in the room. He makes a comment even about, how do you, it's about time you start letting other newspapers into the room. And, well, they'll let them in if they're trying to trap them and put them in jail.
Right.
But so he fell into the trap. The sting works. The kid, Chris is alive, and everything Steve Martin did failed. And he's going to go to jail, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is the theme with the Steve Martin character, just very, very quick escalation, because as soon as he sees Chris, he just loses it. Yeah. He loses it. He tries to run out. He starts firing at them. And again, that leads again to that final brawl in that other office there. But if he had maybe just kept cool, he might've been all right.
Yeah. But that's where you get your last little bit of Superman action, where he really subtly catches a bullet and saves Chris from getting shot. And they did not play it up. The director did not make a big deal out of that at all, but it's there. And they didn't even do a close up of his hand afterwards, with some kind of a wink to the camera or something at the end, like they do every now and then. But it was, that they, like I said, they went out of their way to not spend a lot of money and just have, although, they built a lot of furniture that got wrecked in that fight. There was a lot of breakaway chairs and desks and things that were pretty funny.
Yeah, and so I know we talked about the fight already, but they're going at it. Everyone else comes to the door, and Clark, just puts his arm up to block them, to keep them out. And
Yeah.
you quoted that line earlier where, Lois is pleading with him to help, and he's like, let the boy have his fun. And like we
Yeah.
said, I think, he recognizes Chris needs to have this win for himself. And eventually Chris does prevail. The final exchange, though, is very interesting because he says to Clark, I could have used some help there from Superman. And again, in my headcanon, I'm like, I feel like this guy has pieced it together and he's just having a little bit of fun. Again, there's nothing there to support that, but that's
Right.
I don't know, in my head. And
the character never comes back.
Yeah. Well, we know from season 1, the stolen costume, what Clark does when someone knows a secret, they get a one-way ticket to a mountain cabin.
Yeah, they're going to stay up on the mountains and never be able to get down. But maybe they'll run into Chuck Connors and his cow or whatever.
And finally, Clark says, you put on a pretty good Superman performance yourself, and we're out of the episode. I got to say, going into this, I don't know. I didn't have much in the way of expectation, either way, but I really found myself enjoying it. I thought, again, I like the action. I really like the way they handled the character of Chris. It was a bummer about Lois and not having more to do, but overall, I found this to be a very solid, just like a solid episode. What about you?
It holds together pretty well. It just doesn't, again, I think the reason I didn't remember it as much as I would remember some other episodes is that it really did downplay the Superman parts. They're in there, but they're very small Superman moves. Catching the bullet is as visually active as he gets. Everything else is him sitting on something and pulling it, and having the camera tilt, lying on a roof of a car. There's not a lot of like real Superman's running, jumping, punching, flying. It's just like very minimal, so it didn't stick in my little 8-year-old brain enough. But I think all of these things they're imminently watchable, and I can just see some of it is now that I've worked on TV shows and movies. I always appreciated the unlimited budget we had in comics, but this show is so clearly limited by their own budget. They don't, because it was syndicated and they were funding it all themselves, and it wasn't really a TV show on a channel or anything like that. They did a lot with a little, and they were smart enough to write their stories and adventures with their limitations in mind. And I think that that's partly why this still holds together, and why a young person like yourself would even watch this show.
Well said. Now, the final piece of our episode here, and I meant to give you a heads up ahead of time, so I'm really putting you on the spot, but we rate the episode at the end of it on a scale of 1 to 5 fedoras. So I'll ask you how many out of 5 you would give this one.
Well, again, if you ask 8-year-old me, this gets 2 fedoras, because it is just guys in suits fighting. It's not the suit that I pay my money to see. But as a grown-up human, I would say easy 3.5, maybe 4 fedoras for this one.
That's where I land too. And I'll go so far as to say 4, because I really had a good. But this is what always happens. I always have a good time talking about the episode, regardless of how much I enjoy and then I feel like sometimes that colors my view a little bit, and I feel more positively about it. But no, I did enjoy this one. I think it's such a great Chris White episode. It's a good Superman episode. It's a great Chris White episode. And I think had this character come back even just one more time, that would have amplified this episode even more, because they're setting him up and then they're going to pay it off. But it's kind of a bummer that this is all we get. But it was a great introduction for his character.
But like I said, it was almost like having another Clark Kent around, because he had a big, strong chin. He was able to take care of himself. And even if he got tied up for a minute, he still handles himself pretty well. And it's like he just was a little more heroic than they wanted to, reuse. Whereas, the nutty professors would come back all over the place because the comedy value was more built in, and it was another, not another hero competing.
Right. Well, listen, I thank you so much for taking the time to rewatch and come on here and talk to me about this and talk about the Triangle era. I really do appreciate it. I know you're retired now, but is there anything you want to promote or plug or anywhere you want to direct folks who might be listening to this?
I don't, even when I had things to promote and plug, I didn't really look at these things as places to do that kind of stuff, which I guess is dumb. Because I always get mad, like when our voice actors would be in a Justice League or Superman animated movie, and they'd be on Conan or the Tonight Show or something, and they just never mention the animated work, and I would get mad about it. It's like, just mention it. So, I mean, I guess what I would promote is they have announced that they're putting out a Triangle era omnibus. If you do care about this era and want to have a nice, shelf worthy collected edition, please order it ahead of time. I don't get a penny out of it, but I would love to have a shelf with my era on the wall. But if you don't pre-order it, their elaborate plan to go through all of the Triangle era won't happen, because if people don't order it, it just won't come. It's a Field of Dreams situation. So I guess that's what I'm promoting until, I guess, October is when it's supposed to come out.
Well, amen. I will echo that. I am looking forward to having that on my shelf. And yes, I certainly hope that we get to see that entire period of comics collected. It deserves the treatment. I'm very, very biased, but I truly feel that it deserves a spot. And so I really hope to see it.
Well, I just think it's good comics. It's just good superhero action. And I don't know. It's a way to, like, you could show that stuff to somebody who says, Superman is stupid. He's like a big Boy Scout. And it's like, no, he screws up. He makes mistakes. He doesn't have all the answers. He can't move planets. And it's like, it's not just, he can do anything. One of the reasons why we look to the Clark Kent portrayal from The Adventures of Superman is, I always wanted to find an angle of, like, Clark kind of wants to be Clark. I mean, he is Clark. Superman is the construct in my run of the book. And reporting is a place where he is able to compete on a level playing field with the humans, because he's only as good as his writing. He's only as good as his reporting and his investigations. And he's only as good as he can't type faster than his typewriter or computer keyboard will let him go. So he's got all the limitations, but he's still top of the field because he is good at being a human as well as a superhuman. And I think that's what I always liked about the Clark Kent from the TV show. And what we brought in was, this is his way to compete with humans fairly. It's like that. His father's always telling him, "Yeah, sorry, you can't play football anymore because you got powers and they don't." So here's a place where his powers are not the answer. Maybe he can look through a wall and get some information that you can't get as a reporter, but he really, really, really can't. If he was a terrible writer, he would not be competing with Lois Lane for the Pulitzer Prize.
I've always said I love when being a reporter is more than a cover for him, right? That is something that he cares about, that he's good at. He's engaging with humanity on a different level in a different way. So no, I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad we agree.
Well, again, thank you for your time. Audience, thank you as always for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Make sure you come back next week for season 2, episode 5, Shot in the Dark. And until then, remember, only Superman can do super things. This podcast is made possible by the support of our Patreon community. Sign up for a monthly or annual membership at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato and choose from a range of rewards. This week, I want to spotlight our Daily Planet Bullpen tier, available for $1 a month or $10 for the year. Members at this level are the first to know about upcoming coverage and get to submit a comment or question to be read during the episode. Sign up today, and thank you to all patrons. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey, a weekly exploration of Superman's vast 85-year mythology, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.